I would like to mention to all of you that we started out a couple of weeks ago and we took a broad look at a picture of who was present at the cross. And we talked about it in a broad spectrum. We talked about government leaders, and we talked about religious leaders, and we talked about other characters or other individuals who were there at the cross. And then we scaled it down, and we started looking at the choice and two people that were around the time of the crucifixion. And we looked at the picture of Jesus versus Barabbas and what that meant and what that represented. And we took a little bit deeper dive into who they were and the contrast between them. And this morning we're going to continue to take a scaled down look at people who were present at the time of the crucifixion. And as you can see from our screen, we are going to focus on Pontius Pilate, the Roman governor. And I have to tell you, as I study and as I think about Pilate, and I think about the position that he was in, I have to be willing to at least be sympathetic to some degree of his position, not of his action, but the position that he was in was tough. And then I got to thinking, you know what? A lot of the position that he's in, a lot of things that are taking place, a lot of the concerns that he has to worry about, there's some similarities about the conditions that you and I might face today and the things that we might have to do today. And so I also have to say that I hope you understand, I have a sympathetic position or feeling for my brothers and sisters in Christ as well. And I care about them, and I care for the situations that they come and they're a part of throughout their week as they go out into the world. I'm blessed that I don't have to go out to a job site where I work 40 hours a week, where I'm constantly around worldly people, and maybe not the people that I would choose to spend my time with. And there are going to be times when, much like Pilate feels he's kind of being pressured by the crowd, I'm sure there are times, even for those in school, that there's this crowd pressure that comes upon individuals and Christians to do the right thing, or to follow after them and not do the right thing. There's a tendency to have the majority opposed to what you think or how you feel. There's a tendency to be around and hear conversations or hear jokes that you don't want to be around and you don't want to hear, but they're out there. And so I'm sympathetic to that. And I'm sympathetic to the fact that we're going to find that Pilate was in a position where he was dealing with some things and he was having to make decisions, but they didn't necessarily represent what the crowd represented. As we think about it and as we look at his judgment as far as how he views who Jesus was, he views Jesus the same way you and I do. He views Jesus the same way you and I do. He just didn't have the courage to go along with that. And so we're going to look at what it would be like and what it looked like at this time. And it's interesting when we talk about the trial, if you look at the contrast, you have Jesus standing before Pilate. And Pilate is an earthly judge. He is one who has been given power here on earth to make decisions on this earth for other individuals. On the other hand, you have Pilate standing before Jesus, who is judge of all the earth, right? It's interesting that we have this contrast in the two people that are here. One has some earthly rights and things that he has been granted. The other is the one that allows him to have those rights or has granted those to him. And the one that ought to be in the position of authority is the one that's in a submissive position at this particular moment. So there's a real contrast that we're looking at. And there's a decision that he has to make. He doesn't have a choice. He has been given the responsibility to determine what to do with Jesus. It was passed off to him to some degree because others didn't want to make that choice, and he had the authority to do more. He had the authority to have Jesus killed versus some authorities of the other government that he could have been under that wouldn't have allowed for that same punishment. He has to make a decision. He's in a position of authority, and it's the most important decision that he will make in his life because it's really going to determine who he is and the direction his eternal life is going to go. I mean, he is absolutely in that position. It's the most important decision of our lives too, isn't it? It's the most important position of our lives too. what will we do with Jesus? How will we respond? And just because we've been buried in the waters of baptism and we've risen again, it doesn't stop. The question comes up, now that you've been raised from the waters of baptism, now that you've said, I'm going to follow him, what will you do? What are you going to do? And it is the number one most important decision you'll ever make in your life. And so it's tough. It was tough for Pilate from a standpoint of it's not easy. It also reminds us, though, there is going to come a time in our lives where we have to make a decision. You might be able to put it off and put it off and put it off for a while, but we're going to find that even making no decision is making a decision. That there is going to come a time where you're going to have to act. There's going to come a time where you have to do something. And I want to look at some of the pressure that Pilate feels as he's going through these trials. We're going to pick up again in our text that was read, and I appreciate Brother Jonathan coming and asking me if there was something that I would like him to read. I appreciate him reading that and setting the tone for our lesson, and I would encourage us to consider having a scripture reading again as part of our service. I think it is very beneficial. We're going to go back to it, and we're going to look at first, one of the pressures on Pilate was how the prisoner responded, how Jesus responded to the situation. And I want you to think about someone standing before a judge, and I want you to think about the fact that they're innocent, and they know they're innocent, and how they would react and what they would do in response to their position. And then I want you to look at the attitude of Jesus. Now, Jesus stood before the governor, and the governor asked him, saying, "Are you the king of the Jews?" And Jesus said to him, "It is as you say." And while he was being accused by the chief priests and elders, he answered nothing. So the first thing he says is, "It's as you say." Right? He says, "Are you the king of the Jews?" It's as you say. Not a whole lot. If we were standing before a judge and he said, "Are you guilty of murder?" and we were innocent, we probably wouldn't say, "It is as you say." But he was asked a question, right? He was asked a question, and the question was, "Are you king of the Jews?" And he couldn't lie, right? So he didn't have a choice. Guess what, folks? You can't lie. When the question comes up, you don't have a choice. And so what are you going to do? And our answer should be similar to what Jesus says in regards to that it's an acknowledgement of, yes, he's the king of the Jews. And that was mentioned around the table this morning. And then Jesus says, as he was saying, and while he was being accused by the chief priests and elders, he answered nothing. So after he says, "It is as you say," they begin throwing out false accusations against him. And what would we normally do if we're being falsely accused and we know that our life is about to be taken based on false accusations? We'd probably try to defend ourselves, wouldn't we? We'd probably speak up. And you know what? Pilate's probably thinking, why isn't he saying anything at all? Why isn't this man defending himself? You know, Pilate probably expects that if there's a prisoner before him, he's going to in some way defend himself. And that probably seems strange. And it should seem strange to us to some degree that we don't respond when persecuted. But it's an example. And then we see Pilate said to him, "Do you not hear how many things they testify against you?" And he answered, "Not one word." You know, if Jesus starts defending himself, if Pilate truly believes that he's innocent, that's a benefit to Pilate. Because Pilate then is not the only one defending Jesus. Jesus is defending himself. Because oftentimes we believe that somebody who's accused who doesn't defend themselves, it's because they're guilty. Well, he did say he is the king of the Jews. That was only one thing. But the other accusations that are hurled against him, he doesn't respond to. He just stays there, and he allows for that to take place. And so Pilate marveled greatly. See, I don't even have to tell you, but I did in my own thoughts, that he probably thought this was a strange situation. He did. It's not normal for a person accused and is looking at the death penalty to not defend themselves. And so a lot's got to be going through Pilate's mind. He says he's the king of the Jews. He's not fighting against what's being told. He seems to be willing to accept the consequences. Wouldn't your mind start pondering who this man really is? And start thinking about why he's so different? And so there's a lot in his mind. And I'm sure, being in the position that Pilate was in, he dealt with all kinds of people ready to die. He probably dealt with fanatics who would try to raise their case, and they were absolutely guilty of whatever it is that they were done, and it was probably very easy for him to look at that and say, you know what, he's guilty, he deserves his punishment. But we don't see that. What we see is we're going to see the fulfillment of the prophecy that was made back in Isaiah 53:7 that says he was led as a lamb to the slaughter, and as a sheep before its shearers is silent, so he opened not his mouth. We see in this text the fulfillment of that very prophecy, that he stands there as a lamb about to be slaughtered, and he doesn't try to prevent it. He doesn't try to stop it. He accepts the situation that his Father has allowed him to be in, right? Because he's only there because that's the Father's will. He had the power, he had the ability to change his position. He was the judge of all the world. So, getting back to Pilate, though, he's got to be thinking, why? Why is he responding this way? Why aren't you defending yourself? What is it that's preventing you? And so he's starting to want to learn more about who Jesus is. And so we gave you Jesus' attitude at the time as a pressure, and we looked at what Pilate's impression was of Jesus at that time. And it's interesting, if you ever go to, I like easyquotes.com, there's a lot of good quotes in there from the world. This is a quote from Scriptures where Pilate says, I am innocent of the blood of this just person. So after going through all this and seeing how Jesus portrays himself and how he carries himself, and as a judge he investigates or is privy to information about what's happened, he comes to the conclusion that Jesus is a just man. Right? He comes to a conclusion that Jesus is innocent. But he still has to make a decision. Right? Just because he feels that Jesus is just, what's he going to do about that? Right? Just because we believe that Jesus was just, we believe that he was the Son of God, the question becomes, what do we do with that? And then we have the pressure coming from Pilate's wife and the advice that she gives him. It says in verse 19, while he's sitting on the judgment seat, his wife sent to him saying, have nothing to do with that just man, for I have suffered many things today in a dream because of him. So now we have his wife saying, don't be involved with this. This isn't safe for you. This is a just man. And you know what? If my wife felt it was important enough to send something to me while I'm at work, if you will, while I'm on the judgment seat, my wife has something sent to me that's urgent, as a husband, I'm probably going to want to listen to what she has to say, right? She's thumbs up back there. I'm probably going to want to listen to what she has to say. It's probably important. And so now Pilate's not only got in his mind that Jesus is just, despite what the crowd has said, but now his wife is also saying he's a just man. But what's her advice? Just have nothing to do with it, right? Have nothing to do with it. Wash your hands clean, as he tries to do later. She says, because I've suffered in a dream because of this situation. So don't do this because it's not good for you. So does that give Pilate the right to go ahead and say, you know what? I'll just not do anything. Well, let's look. But certainly her advice is something that he has to consider. And just as a sub-point, there are many husbands today who are in the position that they're in because they listen to the love and concern and the encouragement that their wife gave to them, and listen to the love and encouragement that they gave them about who Jesus is right? And isn't that really what she did? Even though she says, she has concern about who Jesus is, and she's concerned about what happens if you do wrong. And then the religious leaders, right? We have the religious leaders, and we talked about that, and they're going to pressure Pilate. But really, how do they go about pressuring Pilate? Who do they go? Do they put pressure directly on him with their words? Is that how they handle? I'm going to put pressure on you by what I say to you. No, how did they do it? It says the chief priests and the elders persuaded the crowds to ask for Barabbas and to put Jesus to death. See, they put pressure on Pilate, but they did it indirectly, didn't they? They used another source in order to get Pilate to do what they wanted him to do. Does that happen today? Does that happen today to us? Do we have people who want something to come of us, but they don't pressure us directly? They use other people in order to make that happen. They stir up the crowd, and you can start talking about any sin you want that we as Christians are trying to stop. And they're going to stir the people up to get people to do it, right? Because pressure by one is one thing. Pressure by a large crowd is entirely another. I'm going to tell you right now, at least for me, it's a lot easier to stand up to one person than it is to a multitude. Right? A lot easier to stand up. I've talked to people said it's a lot easier for me to teach one-on-one than it is to try and teach to a large group of people. Right? Because there's more pressure. So now we've got the pressure coming from how Jesus acts and the attitude that Jesus has. We have the pressure of his wife and what she has said to him. We have the pressure that he comes to of his own self when he recognizes that he has a just man standing before him. Wonder how you would feel as a judge if you found or felt that a man was just and you came to that conclusion, but everybody else in the world said otherwise. Everybody else around is saying, you might even question yourself, right? Why does the crowd feel this way and I'm the only one? Well, usually that's probably because you're following God. But it's a question that he probably had to face. I think he's innocent, but everybody else says no. And he's not saying otherwise, right? But he still says, I find him innocent. So we had the pressure of the religious leaders through the crowds. And then we have the crowd, right? Now we have the pressure because he's going to ask the crowd who they want to be released, right? He's going to take the choice that he has to make, and he's going to put it out for others to consider, right? Sometimes we say we look for others to give us advice on a decision we might have to make. So he puts it out there. The governor answered and said to them, which of the two do you want me to release to you? And they said Barabbas. And Pilate, not wanting to do so, you can tell he doesn't. He tries to slow them down. He says, but what should I do then with Jesus? Right? Well, if you're gonna take him for free, what do you want me to do with Jesus? Now, he doesn't use the term in this text of this just man, but that's who he's thinking. What do you want me to do with this innocent man then? Right? And the crowds, in typical crowd action, in typical crowd fanaticism, all cry out together, crucify him, crucify him, crucify him, or let him be crucified. And so, once again, Pilate says, why? What evil has he done? You're saying you want this man released, you want this man so tell me what it is that he's done. Why are you doing this? Why? He's still trying to get the crowd to change the way they feel. And the reason he's trying to do that is because it's not what he wants to do, right? He knows he has to make a choice. And in politics, it's pretty common to say, I want to make the decision that pleases the most people. I mean, let's be honest, that's a part of politics, is that, you need the support of people, so you want to have the support of the people. And he's trying to encourage more people. And their response is simply to cry out all the more, saying, "Let him be crucified." And he still has to make a choice. And now he's in a really tough position because it's not what he wants. I want this just man to be set free. I certainly don't want this just man to be murdered. But if I don't do what the crowd asks of me, what's going to happen to me? Right? In his mind, he's probably thinking, at the very minimum, they'll overthrow my government position. But beyond that, what are they going to do for me? If I'm in a position of authority and I don't do what everybody wants done, right? Tough position. Can you at least sympathize? I mean, let's be fair to people when we teach them. Can you at least sympathize with the position he's in? Absolutely. Are there people today that want nothing to do with Jesus and will tell you to kick him away? And we have to make a decision as well. What are we going to do? And we see that question. What evil has he done? But they cried out all the more, saying, "Let him be crucified." And that made me think of Exodus chapter 23 in verse 2, which says, "You shall not follow a crowd to do evil." That's the starting of Exodus chapter 23 and verse 2. And then it's easy to stand with the crowd. It takes courage to stand alone. I would venture to say, it takes faith. It takes faith to stand against the crowd. And it takes faith to recognize, it takes courage to stand alone. It takes faith to stand with God. See, if you're standing alone, that's one thing. If you're one person, but you're standing for God and God is with you, that's another. That takes faith. Also takes courage. But you see, you have to get to a point where you have enough faith to recognize you're not really standing alone. It feels like it. It feels like you're standing alone when you're in a large crowd and you're trying to figure out what to do with Jesus. But the truth is, you're not alone. You have the creator of the universe there with you. Right? Do you want a crowd of hundreds and hundreds of people? Or do you want the creator of those hundreds and hundreds of people? I'll take the creator. Because in my mind, and scriptures teach it, but just in my mind, if he can create it, he can destroy it, right? I made you, I can end you, right? I think I want to stand with God. And so he's got all this pressure. And he's dealing with everything that's going on. And in verses 24 through 26, we find Pilate's mistake. He was doing well, wasn't he? He was doing well. He recognized that Jesus was just. He tried to convince the people of such on more than one occasion, saying he's not evil. And he makes a mistake, though. You see, when Pilate saw that he could not prevail at all, but rather that a tumult was rising, when he saw he couldn't beat the crowd, he took water and washed his hands before the multitude, saying, "I am innocent of the blood of this just person. You see to it." What Pilate's trying to do here, really more than anything, is remain neutral. He's not really standing up, although he says he's innocent of the just person. He's not taking a firm stand. He's kind of standing neutral. He's kind of halfway. Because what he's saying is, I am not going to be the one to crucify this man. But I'll go ahead and allow you to do that. I'll go ahead and allow it to happen. I'm just not going to be the one that's responsible. Isn't he the one that was responsible to let them do it? Right? So you see, he ends up actually choosing to follow the crowd instead of what he believed. In this particular case, peer pressure won. Peer pressure won. And if we're not careful, and if we're not faithful, and we don't stand strong, we could make the same mistake too, couldn't we? We could make the mistake of delivering up Jesus to be crucified. It was great. We sang, "Shall I crucify my Savior again?" We could do and we could make the exact same choice that Pilate made, despite, just like Pilate, not necessarily wanting for that to happen. So he does, in fact, deliver him to be crucified. That's Pilate. That's who Pilate was. Pilate had a tough choice to make. Pilate had a great deal of pressure put upon him. And I sympathize with that. I sympathize with that. But Pilate chose wrong. Pilate chose wrong. And I can't sympathize with that. I can't sympathize with knowing what's right and not doing it. For those who know to do good and not do it, to them it is sin. He knew to do good. Pilate represents each and every one of us today. Pilate represents each and every one of us being in a position where we're going to have to make a decision. And we're going to have to make the most important decision of our life. And that decision is going to direct the path not only of how we walk the rest of our short time here on earth, but it's also going to determine where we stay for our permanent time in eternity. And so I just want to close this out. In just a moment, we're going to stand and sing a song, but I want you to ask yourselves as you sit there, what will you do with Jesus? And if there's something that you need to do now, do it.